The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the CEO, Robert Whittaker, sat confidently at the front, his expensive suit gleaming under the harsh lights. He looked every bit the powerful businessman, a man who had everything. Yet, there was something unsettling about the way he smiled, as though he were untouchable. To him, this case was just a formality, a nuisance that would soon disappear. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. But sitting on the other side of the courtroom, in stark contrast to his polished arrogance, was Judge Judy. She wasn't just any judge, she was the one person in the room who had the courage to take on someone like Robert. And despite her quiet, unassuming demeanor, it was clear to anyone who had ever witnessed her in action that she was ready to deliver justice. Robert leaned back in his chair, smirking as his lawyer spoke, dismissing the employee's claim of unpaid overtime as frivolous. "It's just a few hours," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "We're a growing company, and these things happen. We don't have time to waste on petty complaints." His words dripped with entitlement, his gaze never leaving the employee's seat, almost daring them to continue. But what Robert didn't know was that he had just stepped into a battle with someone who would not back down. Someone who had fought for justice her entire career, someone who had turned countless cases upside down with her relentless pursuit of truth. Someone who had seen it all, and wasn't afraid to take down someone who thought their wealth and status could shield them from the law. Judge Judy was the underdog in this fight. A woman who had spent decades facing down arrogant figures like Robert, those who believed their money and influence gave them the upper hand. But in this courtroom, it was her words, her experience, and her no-nonsense approach that would carry the day. And the moment she set her sights on Robert Whittaker, it was clear, this wasn't just another case. This was her chance to prove that justice wasn't for sale, no matter how rich you were. This section introduces the setup and places Judge Judy in an underdog position, gearing up to take down the CEO despite his confidence. It establishes the emotional stakes and sets the stage for the drama to unfold. The courtroom was alive with murmurs, but all eyes were on Robert Whittaker as he stood tall, oozing confidence that only someone with his wealth and privilege could have. He glanced at his expensive watch, tapping it impatiently as if he were above the proceedings. His arrogance was almost palpable, an invisible wall that separated him from the rest of the room. He had built an empire, after all. So, what was a little overtime to him? To him, it was a minor detail, a mistake that would be quickly brushed under the rug. Across from him, seated in the defendant's chair, was his employee, David Ross. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been starker. David was just an average guy, 28 years old, dressed in a plain button-up shirt and slacks, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. He had always prided himself on working hard, putting in long hours to support his family. The overtime he was owed wasn't just extra hours worked. It was the difference between paying bills on time or falling behind. It was the difference between feeling respected as a person or being treated like an expendable cog in a machine. For David, this case was about more than just money. It was about principle. It was about standing up for himself, for every employee who had been taken advantage of by a boss who saw them as nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet. He had worked long hours, sacrificed time with his family, and for what? To be told that his time was worth less than someone's vacation. No, this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about dignity. Judge Judy listened intently, her eyes narrowed, watching as Robert's attorney continued to make his case. But she wasn't fooled by the shiny suits and slick talk. She'd seen it all before, the big-shot CEOs who thought they could throw their weight around, the ones who used their power to trample on those who worked beneath them. It was a game to them. And for them, it was always about winning. But what they didn't understand was that in Judge Judy's court, this wasn't a game. This was about truth. It was about justice. David's voice trembled as he took the stand, his nerves evident, but there was a fire in his eyes. He wasn't backing down, not now. "I worked those extra hours because I was asked to," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I didn't want to, but I had no choice. I needed the pay, and I trusted that I would get what I was owed." Judge Judy, always the picture of calm, looked over at Robert, her gaze unwavering. He wasn't even listening to David. Instead, he was shifting in his chair, his fingers drumming impatiently on the table. The CEO's indifference only fueled her resolve. The arrogance, the entitlement, it was all too familiar. He thought his wealth could shield him, thought the system would bend to his will. But Judge Judy had never been one to let that slide. She was the underdog, yes, but she was also the one who had brought down more powerful figures than Robert Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker, Judge Judy finally spoke, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. You think this is a simple case, don't you? You think your money will make this go away. But you're wrong. Her words hit the air with the force of a challenge. Robert looked up, his expression finally showing a flicker of something, maybe irritation, maybe unease. It was clear, though, that he wasn't used to being questioned, let alone challenged in such a public way. This is more than just a disagreement over overtime, she continued, her tone hardening. This is about something much bigger. This is about respect. Respect for the people who help make your business successful. Respect for those who make you money while you enjoy the fruits of their labor. Do you understand that, Mr. Whitaker? Robert shifted uncomfortably, his confident demeanor starting to crack. He didn't want to acknowledge what she was saying, but he could feel it. She was digging deeper than he expected, and he wasn't used to being on the defensive. He leaned forward, his jaw tightening, but before he could speak, Judge Judy's eyes locked onto him. I asked you a question, Mr. Whitaker, she said, her voice still calm but laden with the weight of authority. Do you understand what it means to respect your employees? Robert hesitated for a moment, his ego bruised. I respect the work they do, he replied stiffly, but I can't just throw money around whenever someone claims overtime. The company needs to survive. Judge Judy's expression softened, just slightly, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. Survival, Mr. Whitaker. You're worried about survival. You who vacationed in the Caribbean for 2 weeks at the height of your company's busiest season. And you're sitting here telling me you can't afford to pay overtime to an employee who's worked late for you, worked overtime to help make your business what it is? The room fell silent. Robert's face drained of color. The shift was palpable. The people in the courtroom, the ones who had been passive observers moments before, were now leaning in. They had seen it all. They had heard the CEO's defense, his excuses, his talk of company survival. But now, the truth was starting to unravel. Judge Judy continued, you can spin your excuses all you want, but it won't change the fact that you've been lying. You've been using your wealth, your position to cover up your greed, your disregard for the people who made you who you are. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences. Robert looked like he had just been hit by a truck. His eyes darted to his lawyer, but even his attorney seemed uncertain now. There was nowhere left to hide. The truth was out in the open, and there was no running from it. As the tension in the courtroom thickened, a murmur spread through the crowd. They were starting to side with David, starting to see the real picture. And it wasn't pretty. Robert Whitaker, the powerful CEO, had just been exposed, not by some whistleblower, not by an investigative report, but by a single question from Judge Judy. It was a question that had shattered his defense and laid bare the truth for everyone to see. But this was only the beginning. The real confrontation was just getting started. And for Robert Whitaker, there was no turning back. The courtroom was now alive with anticipation. Judge Judy's words hung in the air like an unshakable truth, and for the first time, Robert Whitaker was beginning to feel the weight of them. His face was flushed, a faint sheen of sweat beginning to form at his temples. This wasn't the easy case he had assumed it would be. The confident CEO who once believed his wealth and influence would carry him through was starting to crack, piece by piece. David's attorney stood up, shifting his weight as he prepared to present the damning evidence they had uncovered. The courtroom fell silent once again, all eyes fixed on him. Robert tried to maintain his composure, but the subtle twitching at the corner of his mouth betrayed his growing unease. Your Honor, David's attorney began, his voice calm but resolute, we have here a series of records from Mr. Whitaker's company credit card. These documents show not just expenses related to business, but extravagant personal spending, including a vacation to the Caribbean taken during the height of his company's busiest season. Meanwhile, his employee, Mr. Ross, was working long hours without compensation. The tension in the room escalated. The documents were laid out in front of Judge Judy, their contents visible to everyone in the courtroom. Robert's eyes narrowed as the figures stared back at him, hotel stays at 5-star resorts, lavish meals, expensive excursions, all charged to the company account. Judge Judy leaned forward, her piercing gaze never leaving Robert. Mr. Whitaker, you've made a habit of presenting yourself as a self-made man, but these records show a very different picture. You're not just paying for business trips, you're living in luxury while refusing to compensate the people who keep your company running. Can you explain that? Robert's lips parted, but no words came out at first. He shifted in his seat, glancing nervously at his lawyer, who was now too focused on the documents to offer any guidance. Robert's earlier confidence was slipping away, and his eyes betrayed the realization that the evidence was undeniable. Well, Your Honor, Robert finally began, his voice shaky, it's just. It was a necessary expense. The vacation, I mean. It was for my mental health. You know, stress and everything. I needed a break to make better business decisions. That's all. Judge Judy raised an eyebrow. A mental health break, Mr. Whitaker. Tell me, how does taking a lavish vacation to a tropical resort while your employees work unpaid overtime help the business? How does that show leadership? Robert's jaw clenched. He knew the answer sounded weak, pathetic even. The truth was, he didn't have an answer that could justify his actions. He was out of his depth now, facing a judge who wasn't going to let him hide behind excuses. David sat quietly, his eyes locked on Robert, his hands clasped in his lap. The anger was still there, but now, he could see that Robert was starting to unravel. For the first time since he'd entered the courtroom, David felt something shift within him, the sense that maybe, just maybe, justice was on his side. The silence grew unbearable. Robert opened his mouth to speak again, but nothing came out. He was speechless. The weight of Judge Judy's scrutiny was too much for him to bear. I'll tell you this, Mr. Whitaker, Judge Judy continued, her voice unwavering, you've used your wealth and power to mask your greed. You thought you could get away with paying your employees less than they deserve while you indulged in the luxuries of your high status. You've been playing a game of deception, but it's over now. She paused for a moment, letting the gravity of her words settle. The crowd was listening intently, every eye on Robert. They could feel the shift in the room, the CEO, once so untouchable, was now at the mercy of the very system he thought he could control. Robert wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, his eyes darting to his lawyer once more, as though hoping for some last-minute miracle. But the reality was sinking in. There was no escaping the truth. The evidence was too overwhelming. It's time for you to stop hiding behind your excuses, Mr. Whitaker, Judge Judy said, her tone firm but not unkind. You owe Mr. Ross the overtime you promised him, and you owe every employee who works hard for you the respect they deserve. No one is above the law, especially you. David's heart raced as he listened to Judge Judy's words. For the first time, he felt like he was being heard, like someone was finally acknowledging his worth. He had spent too long fighting for recognition in a world that often overlooked him. But now, the most powerful figure in the room was standing up for him, standing up for justice. The silence in the courtroom was broken by the soft rustle of paper as David's lawyer prepared to make one final point. Your Honor, we ask that the defendant be held accountable for his actions, not only financially but also by making a public statement about the treatment of employees in his company. Judge Judy nodded, her expression hardening as she looked over at Robert. That's fair, she said simply. It's time for Mr. Whitaker to learn that leadership means responsibility, to those who work for you, to your customers, and to the law. Robert's shoulders sagged as the weight of the moment hit him. He had never expected this to happen. He had never thought for a second that someone like Judge Judy would stand up to him, to expose him for the fraud he was. But now, in the cold light of truth, he was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. As the courtroom held its collective breath, David's lawyer turned to him, offering a nod of encouragement. David gave a small, hesitant smile in return. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about something far more valuable, his dignity, his right to be treated with respect. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. Robert Whitaker's pride had been chipped away piece by piece, his once unshakable confidence now a shadow of what it had been. As Judge Judy continued to lay out the facts, Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His expensive suit, once a symbol of power and success, now felt like a prison. He couldn't escape the truth. Judge Judy's gaze never left him. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. Mr. Whitaker, you've had every opportunity to defend your actions. You've claimed that the money wasn't there, that you couldn't afford to pay your employees what they deserved. But these records, this evidence, she pointed to the papers on her desk, show the truth. You spent tens of thousands on a luxury vacation. That wasn't a necessary expense, that was self-indulgence. While your employees were working overtime, you were lounging by the pool, eating at exclusive restaurants, living the high life. The courtroom held its breath as Judy's words rang out, each one a punch to Robert's ego. He had no words to defend himself. Every explanation he had tried to offer was rendered meaningless by the overwhelming evidence of his hypocrisy. You see, Mr. Whitaker, Judge Judy continued, her voice growing sharper, it's not just about the money. It's about the message you've sent to your employees. It's about the way you've treated people who helped build your empire. You've used their labor, their hard work, and in return, you've given them nothing but excuses. You thought you could hide behind your wealth and power, but I'm here to tell you that the law doesn't work that way. Robert's eyes darted nervously around the room, his earlier arrogance replaced with a growing sense of desperation. He had underestimated Judge Judy. He had thought she was just another judge, another obstacle to dismiss. But now, he was beginning to realize that she was a force that couldn't be ignored. You think your money can shield you from accountability. But it doesn't, she said, her voice unwavering. No amount of wealth or status will protect you from the truth. And the truth is, you failed your employees. You took advantage of them, and now it's time to pay the price. There was no escape now. The crowd in the courtroom was silent, watching as Robert's defense crumbled. The judge's words, sharp and decisive, left no room for doubt. He had been exposed for who he truly was, a man who thought he could get away with taking advantage of others for his own gain. As Judge Judy's words echoed in the room, David's heart swelled with a sense of vindication. This wasn't just a win for him, this was a win for every worker who had ever been overlooked, underpaid, and disrespected. He had been heard. The truth had been brought to light. For Robert Whitaker, there was no way out. The world he had built on lies and exploitation was crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of the justice he thought he could avoid. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, the silence thick and heavy, as Judge Judy leaned forward, her hands firmly planted on the desk. Her eyes, sharp as daggers, never left Robert Whitaker. The CEO was visibly shaken, his face pale, his posture slumped. The arrogance that had once filled him was now gone, replaced by the bitter realization that he had underestimated the force standing before him. Judge Judy's voice, steady and clear, sliced through the tension. You've been lying, Mr. Whitaker. And now, it's time for you to answer for it. Robert opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. All of his wealth, all of his connections, had been useless in the face of the truth. He had thought his status could shield him, but the walls of his empire were beginning to crumble, piece by piece. Judge Judy didn't wait for his response. She picked up a stack of documents from the table, carefully laying them out in front of her. Here's the problem, Mr. Whitaker, she said, her voice calm but firm. You've used your position, your power, to exploit people. You've taken advantage of your employees, worked them to the bone, and when it was time to pay up, you chose to turn a blind eye. And now, you want to sit here and act like it's all just a misunderstanding. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he couldn't escape the gaze of the judge. The evidence was clear, undeniable. There was nowhere left to hide. The problem isn't just that you didn't pay your employees for their overtime, she continued. It's that you've shown a complete lack of respect for the people who helped make your business successful. You've treated them as if they don't matter, as if their hard work and dedication aren't worth anything. She looked over at David, who sat quietly, his eyes filled with both pain and determination. But David is here today, fighting for what he deserves. And he's not alone. David's heart swelled with a mix of pride and relief. For so long, he had felt like just another faceless worker, overlooked and unheard. But now, here he was, standing up for himself, for all the others who had been treated the same way. Judge Judy had given him the platform he needed, and for the first time in his life, he felt seen. Mr. Whitaker, Judge Judy said, her voice unwavering, you are not above the law. No one is. Your money, your influence, none of it can protect you from the consequences of your actions. You think you can buy your way out of this, but the truth is, the people you've wronged are speaking now, and their voices will not be silenced. Robert's eyes darted from Judge Judy to his lawyer, then back to the documents in front of him. His breathing had become shallow, his mind racing. He had spent years building his empire, but now it all seemed so fragile, so meaningless. He had thought he could control everything, but now he was facing the full force of accountability, and it terrified him. Judge Judy's next words hit like a thunderclap. "You've been living a lie, Mr. Whitaker. You've been using your wealth to create an illusion of success, but all the while, you've been exploiting the very people who made that success possible. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences." Robert's jaw clenched, his fists balling at his sides. He wanted to lash out, to deny everything, to fight back. But the truth was too powerful, too undeniable. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on him, the weight of their judgment pressing down. For the first time, he was no longer in control. The power dynamic had shifted, and he was on the receiving end of the justice he had always thought he could avoid. David's attorney stood up, his voice steady as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we request that the defendant be ordered to pay the overtime owed to Mr. Ross, as well as additional damages for the emotional distress caused by his actions. This isn't just about money, it's about holding Mr. Whitaker accountable for the way he's treated his employees." Judge Judy nodded, her gaze unwavering as she looked at Robert. "You've heard the request, Mr. Whitaker. And I will make my decision. But make no mistake, this isn't just about financial compensation. This is about sending a message. You can't buy your way out of this. You will be held accountable, and you will face the consequences of your actions." Robert opened his mouth to respond, but once again, his words failed him. What could he say? How could he explain away the evidence, the truth that had been laid bare for all to see? There was no defense left, no excuse he could make. He had been caught. Judge Judy's eyes softened for just a moment as she addressed David. "You've shown courage today, Mr. Ross. You've stood up for yourself and for what's right. And that's something we should all take note of. No one should ever have to fight for what they're owed, but sometimes, that's the reality. And when that happens, we have to do what's right." David's eyes welled with emotion. He had worked so hard to get to this moment, to finally feel like he mattered. And now, here he was, standing in front of a judge who not only saw him but valued his fight for justice. It was more than just a victory, it was validation that his voice, his efforts, had meaning. Judge Judy looked at Robert one last time, her expression hardening once more. "It's over, Mr. Whitaker. You've lost. And now, you'll pay for what you've done." The courtroom was thick with anticipation as Judge Judy prepared to deliver her verdict. Robert Whitaker, still reeling from the revelations, sat silently at the front, his eyes downcast, his hands fidgeting with the cuffs of his jacket. The CEO, who had once been the embodiment of power and wealth, now looked small and defeated. His bravado had long since evaporated, leaving him exposed, and vulnerable. Judge Judy turned her gaze to the documents laid before her, the weight of the decision resting on her shoulders. This wasn't just about a monetary dispute between an employer and his employee, this was about holding someone accountable for their actions, for the lives they affected. The courtroom was silent, waiting for her to speak. After a long pause, Judge Judy's voice rang out, firm and decisive. "Mr. Whitaker, this case was not just about overtime pay. This was about fairness, about respect, and about doing what's right. Your actions have shown a complete disregard for the people who helped build your company, the people who made your success possible. And for that, there are consequences." Robert shifted in his seat, a flicker of anger passing through his eyes. He had been here before, on the other side of the courtroom, facing employees who had no choice but to accept the terms he set. But now, the tables had turned. The power he had wielded so easily for years was slipping through his fingers, and for the first time, he felt powerless. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Mr. Whitaker," Judge Judy continued, her tone unrelenting, "I've heard your excuses. I've listened to your defense, and I've seen the evidence. You took advantage of your employees, and you thought your wealth and influence would shield you from the consequences of your actions. But today, I'm here to make it clear, no one is above the law, not even you." David, still seated on the opposite side of the courtroom, could feel his heart pounding in his chest. His body was tense, but inside, there was a quiet relief. He had fought for so long, not just for himself but for every worker who had been exploited, overlooked, and dismissed. And now, finally, it seemed like justice was within reach. Judge Judy's eyes softened as she turned toward David, offering a slight nod of acknowledgement. She could see the pain, the years of struggle etched into his face. But she also saw his strength, the quiet dignity with which he had stood his ground. He had been the underdog in this fight, just like she had been. But together, they had turned the tide. "You've worked hard, Mr. Ross," Judge Judy said, her voice gentler now. "You've put in the time and the effort, and you've shown remarkable patience. This case wasn't just about the money, it was about standing up for yourself, for your worth. And that is something everyone should take note of." David felt a lump rise in his throat, his chest tightening. He had spent so long feeling invisible, like his hard work didn't matter, that hearing those words from Judge Judy meant more than he could put into words. For the first time, he felt validated, seen, and heard. The years of self-doubt, of questioning whether he had the right to demand what he was owed, seemed to fade in that moment. "I'm awarding Mr. Ross the overtime pay he is owed," Judge Judy announced, her voice cutting through the air like a final judgment. "But that's not all. I'm also imposing additional damages for emotional distress, because Mr. Whitaker's actions went far beyond a simple error in bookkeeping. He took advantage of his employee, and that has consequences." The courtroom erupted into whispers. Robert's face twisted in disbelief. He had expected a slap on the wrist, a quick resolution, and then he would walk away without consequence. But this? This was not what he had expected. And for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to be held accountable. His empire was built on lies, and now, it was crumbling. Judge Judy stood up from her chair, her gaze never leaving Robert. "You may have built an empire, Mr. Whitaker, but you've lost something far more valuable today. You've lost your integrity. And that, Mr. Whitaker, is something that money cannot buy back." Robert's shoulders slumped, his eyes still on the floor. He could feel the weight of the decision sinking in, the full force of the consequences. He had lost, not just the case, but his reputation, his self-respect, and perhaps even his grip on the life he had worked so hard to create. David stood up, a sense of triumph filling his chest. He had done it. He had won. And though the money was important, it was the sense of justice, of righting the wrongs, that mattered most. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. As David turned to leave the courtroom, he caught Judge Judy's eye. She gave him a small, approving nod, and for the first time, he felt like he truly belonged. He had stood up for what was right, and now, he was walking out of the courtroom not just as an employee, but as a victor. As the court session came to a close, the weight of what had just transpired lingered in the air. Robert Whitaker sat motionless, his head low, as the finality of Judge Judy's decision sank in. The luxury that had once surrounded him seemed distant now, like an illusion. The applause of justice, though silent, was deafening to him. David stood tall, his heart still racing, but now filled with an overwhelming sense of relief and pride. For so long, he had doubted himself, allowing others to define his worth. But today, in the face of the system and in front of thousands, he had fought for his rights, and he had won. As he walked out of the courtroom, the tension he had carried for so long started to melt away. There was still a long road ahead of him, but today was the first day of a new chapter. The people who had doubted him, the ones who had whispered behind his back, had seen what it meant to stand up for yourself. And now, David was no longer just another employee in the background, he was a symbol of perseverance and justice. The world outside the courtroom felt different as David stepped into the sunlight. The same streets, the same buildings, but everything felt just a little bit brighter. He had taken the first step in reclaiming his life, no longer just a cog in the machine, but a man with the power to change his own fate. But even as David found his footing, Robert Whitaker's empire was beginning to crumble. The media had caught wind of his courtroom defeat, and soon, the headlines would follow. A man who once stood at the top of the corporate ladder was now facing the consequences of his actions. And while his wealth could buy him many things, it could not buy back his reputation. Judge Judy's final words echoed in David's mind as he walked away. "You're stronger than you know. Keep going, and one day, you'll stand up for yourself again. And when you do, you'll be unstoppable." David smiled to himself. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt confident that no matter what came his way, he could face it head-on. He had a voice, and he would use it. No longer silenced by fear or doubt, he knew he was more than capable of achieving anything he set his mind to. If you've ever stood up for what's right, or if you've ever fought for your worth, leave a comment below and tell us about your story. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of real justice. Because when we stand together, we make the world a better place.